So this is a slightly more nebulous topic that I want to discuss in a little more detail today. It's in regards to squatting, specifically the knees out cue. And kind of to take things back a step and kind of discuss the why behind this cue. A lot of times when someone is squatting, we are assessing as a coach their ability to generate force in a vertical fashion. So essentially, if I'm going to make you do a vertical jump, maximum off a vertical jump, or if we're thinking sport specific here, not from a testing perspective. So if you're going through any sort of vertical propulsion for a rebound or for a high jump, anything like that, then essentially the squat is a means to obviously increase that strength, but also if we're just talking a body weight squat, we're kind of assessing from a movement standpoint, can their joints get into position to absorb and adapt to force? So that's kind of Charlie Weingroff saying for the FMS, but if we think about all movement patterns, that's kind of what we're doing. So with the squat, when we're thinking about this kind of knees out position, as some like to cue it, Starett, for example, they're really thinking, well, from an ACL mechanistic perspective, we know that when we have a position of load, from an eccentric into a concentric load, coupled with internal rotation and adduction in the frontal plane, that's typically one of the mechanisms for ACL injuries. So when we think back to squatting, there hasn't been as many, or even that many, ACL injuries in regards to this valgus knee position as someone's coming out of the hole. But at the same time, that's kind of what we're thinking from a professional standpoint or a coaching standpoint. Can these joints get into the proper position without load and at low velocities? So I was reading another conversation between Bill Hartman and some other strength and conditioning coaches, and they were discussing this knees out cue. And Hartman made a very insightful comment. Well, what if we stop thinking about it as valgus and start thinking about it as adduction and internal rotation? Which was a valid point and something that kind of got me thinking. So when we typically see this knees in position, especially with female athletes, the other thing that we usually see coupled with that is the head will shoot back and they'll be in this position coming up out of the hole. You'll see this a lot with Olympic lifters. So then I started thinking about Mike Boyle's concept of the kinetic chain and kind of this joint by joint approach. Whether or not we follow that approach or not, let's take things back to biomechanics. We know that when we have an anterior tilt of the pelvis, that's coupled with internal rotation of the femurs. So if someone has poor pelvic control, in the case of perhaps an ACL injury, then it may not be an issue with the actual stability of the quad. It may be an issue with stability in the hip and within the core to control the pelvis, if that makes sense. Getting back to the squatting issue though, what we have to think about as coaches and as practitioners is that if we have an athlete who consistently comes in and has that valgus twitch, as Contreras refers to it, perhaps we don't need to cue them if the twitch isn't excessive. If it's just a natural part of the movement, we need to think, oh, that's adduction and that's internal rotation. Now, is it bilateral on both sides? So if we think from a PRI perspective, or if we just think from a general movement perspective, if you don't like PRI, if we have something occurring asymmetrically, where the knee is diving in, coming out of the hole on one side versus another, let's say they're a rotational athlete like baseball, golf, tennis, then we know that we've got an issue going on at the hip or at the foot. So if that's the case, then we need to address either one of those components and not just cue knees out, knees out, knees out, because that's not going to fix it. The other thing that you need to think about is this whole core control issue. So if you have someone that's constantly getting this knees in position, whether it be bilateral or unilateral, as I just discussed, but if it's bilateral especially, and we see the head going back, which typically drives a position of extension, you'll see it in a lot of deadlifters when they get stuck coming out of the bottom. What's the first thing? They throw the head back. Olympic lifters too. It's not bad. Extension is not bad. That's not what I'm saying. It is a movement that is needed during weightlifting. But at the same time, we need to understand that an ideal position is neutral, at least from an injury prevention standpoint when we're thinking about this ACL mechanism of injury. So if you're chronically seeing this bilateral knees in, coupled with a head up, or a chin pointed up, then we're probably going to see some extension through the lumbar spine as well. So as a coach, you need to be thinking, all right, well, I need to program in more anti-extension drills and work on helping this client or this athlete to understand how to move through the hip and not through the spine. So think quadruped rock back, think cat-camel drills on all fours. All these drills that are in more stable positions that can give the athlete kind of proprioceptive points of feedback. So they've got 2 hands, 2 knees, and their toes. So they have more points of feedback here so that they can then focus on what's going on within the spine. So it's kind of a concept that is more geared towards coaches and professionals, but it's something to think about that perhaps we need to stop looking at the compensations in movement and trying to just cue out of the compensations, and we need to really get to the root of the issue, which in this case could be an issue within the hip, within the core, within the foot. So we need to kind of hash each of those out and examine them individually rather than just trying to take the easy road out and just cue them and say, knees out, push them out farther, don't let them come in. So give it a shot, try to think logically about these things as you're working through them.